In the year 1346, merchants traveling the Silk Road began carrying something far more dangerous than their goods. Rumors had been spreading for months. Entire cities in China and Central Asia were being emptied, not by war, not by famine, by a sickness that killed within days. Modern genetic research has traced the origin to a specific place. In 2022, scientists analyzed DNA from graves near Lake Issyk-Kul in modern-day Kyrgyzstan. The tombstones, dated 1338 and 1339, listed the cause of death as pestilence. The bacterium they found was Yersinia pestis, the ancestor of every plague strain that has infected humans since. For nearly a decade, the disease moved westward along trade routes, through Persia, through Syria, through Egypt. Europe heard the rumors, but rumors from the east were easy to ignore, until October 1347. 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily. The people who gathered on the docks were met with a horrifying sight. Most of the sailors aboard were dead. Those still alive were gravely ill, their skin covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. The Sicilian authorities, realizing something was terribly wrong, ordered the ships out of the harbor immediately. But it was already too late. The disease had stepped ashore. The ships had sailed from Caffa, a Genoese trading colony on the Black Sea coast. According to the chronicle of Gabriele de' Musi, a notary from Piacenza, the Mongol army besieging Caffa had been devastated by the plague. In desperation, they catapulted the bodies of their dead over the city walls. Whether this act of biological warfare was truly the cause of the outbreak in Caffa remains debated by historians. But what is certain is that the fleeing Genoese sailors carried the disease with them across the Mediterranean. Within weeks, it had spread to mainland Italy. The disease presented in 3 forms, though people at the time did not distinguish between them. The most common was bubonic plague. Victims developed large, painful swellings called buboes in the groin, armpits, and neck. These swellings turned black, giving the disease its later name. Fever followed, then delirium. Death came within 3 to 5 days. The second form, pneumonic plague, attacked the lungs. Victims coughed blood and could spread the disease simply by breathing near another person. This form killed within 2 days. The third and rarest form, septicemic plague, entered the bloodstream directly. Victims could die within hours, sometimes before any symptoms appeared at all. Giovanni Boccaccio, the Italian writer who witnessed the plague firsthand in Florence, wrote that the disease was so virulent that simply touching the clothes of a sick person was enough to become infected. He described seeing 2 pigs in the street rooting through the rags of a dead man. Within hours, both pigs were dead. From Sicily, the plague spread with terrifying speed. By January 1348, it had reached Genoa and Venice. By March, it was in Florence. By June, it had crossed the Alps into France. Paris fell by the summer. By the autumn, it had crossed the English Channel. England's ports were hit first: Bristol, Southampton, London. From there it moved north, reaching Scotland by 1349. The Scots, who had initially celebrated the English suffering, called it the foul death of the English. Then it crossed their border too. By 1350, the plague had reached Scandinavia, carried by a ghost ship that drifted into the port of Bergen, Norway. Every person aboard was dead. From Norway, it spread to Sweden, Denmark, and eventually into Russia, completing a circuit that had begun in Central Asia. In 3 years, the plague had covered virtually every corner of Europe. The few places that escaped, like Milan and parts of Poland, did so largely through extreme measures. Milan's ruler ordered the first houses where plague appeared to be bricked up entirely, with the inhabitants still inside. the healthy and the sick alike. It was brutal. But Milan survived. No account of the Black Death is more vivid than Giovanni Boccaccio's description of Florence in the spring of 1348. Writing in the introduction to his Decameron, Boccaccio described a city that had lost all sense of social order. Fathers abandoned their sick children. Wives left their dying husbands. Neighbors refused to help neighbors. The bonds that held society together simply dissolved. The sick were left to die alone. There were not enough priests to administer last rites, not enough grave diggers to bury the dead. Bodies were left in houses for days until the smell alerted the living. They were then carried to churches, but the churches quickly overflowed. Boccaccio described how trenches were dug in churchyards, and the dead were stacked in layers like cargo in a ship. Hundreds of bodies in a single pit, covered with a thin layer of earth, then more bodies on top. The city's population dropped from roughly 120,000 to fewer than 50,000 in a matter of months. Florence, one of the wealthiest and most cultured cities in Europe, was brought to its knees. With no understanding of bacteria or contagion, medieval people searched desperately for explanations. The medical faculty of the University of Paris, consulted by King Philip VI of France, issued an official report in October 1348. Their conclusion was that a conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius on March 20, 1345, had corrupted the air, creating poisonous vapors that caused the plague. Doctors recommended burning aromatic herbs and carrying bouquets of flowers to ward off the bad air. The iconic plague doctor masks with their long beaks, filled with herbs and vinegar, emerged from this belief. They were essentially medieval gas masks, built on a theory that was entirely wrong. Other remedies were equally futile. Bloodletting with leeches, lancing the buboes, drinking mixtures of crushed emeralds, sitting between two enormous fires. None of it worked. Some turned to religion with terrifying intensity. Groups called the Flagellants marched from town to town, publicly whipping themselves until they bled, believing that the plague was God's punishment and that their suffering would atone for humanity's sins. The movement grew so large that Pope Clement VI eventually condemned it. Perhaps the darkest chapter within the darkness of the plague was the persecution of Jewish communities across Europe. Rumors spread that Jews had poisoned the wells, deliberately spreading the disease. There was no evidence for this. Jews were dying of the plague at the same rate as everyone else. But fear does not require evidence. In Strasbourg, on February 14, 1349, before the plague had even reached the city, approximately 2,000 Jews were rounded up and burned alive on a wooden platform in the Jewish cemetery. Their property was divided among the townspeople. The city council that had tried to protect them was overthrown and replaced. Similar massacres occurred across the Rhineland, in Basel, Freiburg, and Cologne. Pope Clement VI issued 2 papal bulls declaring that Jews were not responsible for the plague and ordering their protection. His words were largely ignored. The violence was not universal. In some regions, particularly in Poland and Lithuania, Jewish communities were protected by local rulers and survived. Many Jews who fled Western Europe settled in Poland, forming the foundation of what would become the largest Jewish population in Europe. Of all the accounts from the Black Death, none is more devastating than the words of Agnolo di Tura, a chronicler from Siena, Italy. He wrote, "The mortality in Siena began in May. It was a cruel and horrible thing. It is impossible for the human tongue to recount the awful truth. Indeed, one who did not see such horribleness can be called blessed." He continued, "And I, Agnolo di Tura, buried my 5 children with my own hands, and so many died that all believed it was the end of the world." There are no metaphors here, no literary flourishes. A father dug 5 graves, placed his children in them, covered them with earth, and then sat down to write about it. Giovanni Villani, the great chronicler of Florence, was in the middle of writing his own history of the plague when the disease killed him. His chronicle simply stops mid-sentence. His brother Matteo would later pick up where he left off. The medieval world as people knew it was gone. But from the ruins of the old order, something unexpected emerged. What are you thinking right now? Did you expect the story to go this way? Did you already know these facts? If not, hit like and subscribe. There's more history like this waiting, because what comes next might surprise you even more. The scale of the Black Death is almost impossible to comprehend. Modern estimates suggest that between 75 and 200 million people died across Eurasia between 1346 and 1353. In Europe alone, the death toll was between 25 and 50 million, roughly 1/3 of the entire population. Some cities lost more than half their inhabitants. Others were completely emptied. Entire villages vanished from the map, their names surviving only in land records and tax rolls that suddenly listed no taxpayers. In England, the population fell from roughly 6 million to 2.5 million. In Italy, some regions lost 80% of their people. Egypt, where the plague arrived via trade ships from the Mediterranean, lost approximately 40% of its population. The dying was not evenly distributed. The poor, living in crowded conditions with little sanitation, died in far greater numbers than the wealthy, who could afford to flee to their country estates. But even the rich were not safe. King Alfonso XI of Castile died of the plague. So did Joan, the daughter of King Edward III of England, who contracted the disease on her way to her own wedding. The Black Death did not simply kill people. It destroyed the foundations of medieval society and in doing so, created the conditions for a new world. With 1/3 of the labor force dead, the feudal system began to collapse. Surviving peasants suddenly had bargaining power. They demanded higher wages. They refused to work under the old conditions. When the English Parliament tried to freeze wages at pre-plague levels through the Statute of Labourers in 1351, it triggered decades of unrest that culminated in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. The authority of the church was deeply shaken. Priests had died in enormous numbers because they had been in close contact with the sick. Those who survived often faced a crisis of faith. If the plague was God's punishment, what had the faithful done to deserve it? The church had no satisfactory answer. This crisis would eventually contribute to the Protestant Reformation more than a century later. And from the devastation came an unexpected consequence. The wealth of the dead was redistributed to the living. A smaller population inherited the same amount of land and resources. Standards of living rose. Art and culture flourished. The intellectual energy that had been suppressed by centuries of feudalism was unleashed. Within a generation, the Renaissance had begun. The Black Death of 1347 to 1353 was not the end. The plague returned to Europe in waves, roughly every decade, for the next 3 centuries. The Great Plague of London in 1665, the Plague of Marseille in 1720. Each outbreak smaller than the last, as populations developed partial immunity and quarantine measures improved. The word quarantine itself comes from this period. The Italian quarantina, meaning 40 days, was the period that ships were required to wait at anchor before passengers could disembark. Venice established the first permanent plague hospital, the Lazaretto, on a small island in its lagoon. These were among the first public health measures in Western history. The bacterium Yersinia pestis is still with us today. Cases of bubonic plague are reported every year, primarily in Madagascar, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Western United States. But modern antibiotics can treat it effectively if caught early. What once killed a third of a continent is now curable with a course of medication. 700 years have passed since the Black Death swept across the world. We have Boccaccio's testimony. We have Agnolo di Tura's grief. We have the empty villages, the abandoned churches, the mass graves that archaeologists still uncover today. But the vast majority of those who died left no record at all. No chronicle, no tombstone, no name in any document that survived. 75 million people. And we do not know most of their names. What we do know is that the world they left behind was fundamentally different from the one they had lived in. The plague did not just end lives, it ended an entire way of life. But that is a story for another time. What story would you like to hear next? Let us know in the comments.